Ozzy Osbourne, known to millions as the Prince of Darkness, spent much of his life on stage, transforming pain into power and music into legend. Yet, as his final days approached, the curtain began to fall not just on a career, but on a life marked by intensity, vulnerability, and unbreakable bonds. The closing chapter of Ozzy's story was one of reflection, quiet strength, and deep emotional resonance that moved everyone who had ever been touched by his music and presence. Though frail and slowed by age and illness, Ozzy never stopped being Ozzy. He continued to project an image of raw authenticity, whether he was struggling to walk without assistance or fighting back tears during heartfelt conversations. It became clear to those closest to him, especially Tony Iommi, his bandmate and lifelong friend, that Ozzy was beginning to say goodbye, not in words, but in the silences, the glances, and the trembling embraces. One of the most profound aspects of Ozzy's final days was the powerful, unspoken connection he shared with Iommi. Their friendship, forged in the working-class neighborhoods of Birmingham and solidified in the chaotic early days of Black Sabbath, had endured for over 50 years. As teenagers, they were just two boys with a dream. As adults, they became pioneers of heavy metal. And in the end, they were two old souls who had traveled through hell and back together, bound by music, brotherhood, and mutual understanding. There was something poetic in the way Ozzy carried himself during those last moments. Despite his weakening health, he insisted on showing up, to rehearsals, to recording sessions, to interviews, not for fame or obligation, but because music was his soul, and he wanted to live that truth until the very end. His body may have been tired, but his spirit still hummed with riffs, lyrics, and memories that could never be silenced. During what would become one of their final times together, Tony noticed a change in Ozzy. His usual humor was still there, but behind it was a deep melancholy. Ozzy looked at him not just as a bandmate, but as a brother, with eyes that said what words could not. "This may be the last time." Tony later admitted that it was in Ozzy's eyes, his hesitations and the long, lingering hugs that he sensed a farewell was taking place. For fans who grew up idolizing him, the news of Ozzy's declining health was devastating. Yet even in his vulnerability, he inspired. He showed the world that there was dignity in aging, strength in weakness, and honor in facing the inevitable with grace. He didn't hide from death. He met it with the same defiant spirit that had defined his life. Whether crooning a ballad or screaming into a microphone, Ozzy never stopped being himself. Ozzy's final days were also filled with love. From his family to his bandmates to generations of fans, he was surrounded by those who owed so much to his existence. Sharon, his wife and anchor through countless storms, remained by his side, offering unwavering support. His children, once the subject of reality TV fame, now stood as proud adults who had seen both the chaos and the genius of their father. And Tony Iommi, perhaps the one person who truly understood Ozzy the artist and the man, stayed connected until the very end. In the end, Ozzy Osbourne didn't need a grand goodbye or a final concert to leave his mark. He had already etched himself into the hearts of millions. His voice, once trembling with rage and sorrow, now echoed with timeless wisdom. The man who gave the world Paranoid, Crazy Train, and countless anthems of rebellion, gave us one final gift, the image of a legend growing quiet, but never fading. Ozzy's death, when it came, was not the end. It was the culmination of a life that burned brighter than most, full of contradictions, glory, and raw emotion. And as the lights dimmed and silence fell, one truth remained. The Prince of Darkness had found peace, but his legacy would scream forever. Through every chapter of their lives, from the grimy streets of Birmingham to the grand stages of rock history, Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi maintained a bond that defied the chaos that so often surrounds fame. Their friendship wasn't built on perfection, but on resilience, mutual respect, and an unspoken understanding that can only be born of decades spent side by side in the fire of creation and controversy. Their relationship had its share of cracks. There were times when egos clashed, when drugs and pressure from the industry threatened to sever their connection. When Ozzy was fired from Black Sabbath in 1979, it seemed like their journey together had come to a bitter end. But even during years of estrangement, the shadow of their brotherhood lingered, always present, always unfinished. Time, as it often does, softened the edges of the past, and when they reunited, first for fleeting performances, and later for a full reunion that culminated in the 2013 album 13, it was more than just a professional reconnection. It was emotional healing. Both men had aged, battled illness, and stared mortality in the face. They had grown into their scars and could look at one another not just as musicians, but as survivors of addiction, of fame, and of a lifestyle that had claimed so many others. Tony once called Ozzy, "my brother, always has been." And that sentiment only deepened as Ozzy's health began to deteriorate in his final years. The multiple surgeries, the Parkinson's diagnosis, and the toll of a life lived at full volume slowed the Prince of Darkness. But Tony remained close, a steady presence in a stormy time. In interviews, Tony often spoke of their renewed closeness with a mixture of pride and sadness, as if trying to hold on to the magic they once created, while knowing the end was drawing near. Their final moments together were not marked by fanfare, but by quiet, deeply human connection. Days before Ozzy passed, he shared a deeply personal conversation with Tony, a reflection on their journey, their music, and the legacy they would leave behind. Though the details of that exchange remain private, Tony's public tribute after Ozzy's death spoke volumes. His words were raw, laced with both sorrow and reverence, calling Ozzy not just a friend, but a part of his soul. Their friendship is one of rock's great love stories, an enduring testament to how music can create not only legends, but lifelong bonds. In the end, Ozzy and Tony were more than bandmates. They were brothers forged not in blood, but in riff and rhythm, laughter and pain. And though one has now gone, the music they made together continues to echo, immortal and unbroken. As the twilight of Ozzy Osbourne's life drew near, one force remained unwaveringly present: music. For over 5 decades, it had been the lifeblood, the language, and the invisible thread binding Ozzy Osbourne and Tony Iommi together. Long after the final notes of a concert faded and the roar of the crowd dissolved into silence, their shared connection through music endured, timeless, unbreakable, and profoundly human. From the haunting riffs of Black Sabbath to the crushing momentum of War Pigs and the melancholic echoes of Changes, music was more than a career or collaboration. It was the core of their friendship. Even during their years apart, when egos clashed and demons took their toll, it was music that brought them back. Whenever Tony's guitar rang out with that unmistakable weight, it was as if Ozzy's voice instinctively knew its place, dancing between the notes, defying mortality. In the final months, when Ozzy's health began to fail him, when the stage lights grew dimmer and his body could no longer carry the burden of performance, Tony was there, not just as a former bandmate, but as the friend who understood Ozzy without words. He would sit by his side, guitars sometimes in hand, sometimes not, as they reminisced and laughed like the Birmingham boys they once were. The lines between their past and present blurred, and through it all, music filled the space between them, soft, steady, sacred. Tony later described those moments not in terms of sadness, but of reverence. There was something eternal in the way Ozzy responded to sound, he said in an interview. Even when he could barely stand, his eyes would light up when we talked music. He was music. And perhaps that is the most enduring truth. Music had always been their compass, guiding them through fame, fortune, heartbreak, and healing. It gave their friendship dimension, resilience, and ultimately peace. In their final jam together, private, stripped of crowds or cameras, Ozzy sang quietly as Tony strummed. No one recorded it. No one needed to. For it wasn't meant for anyone but them. Two friends, two survivors, two legends, finding each other again at the place where it all began, in sound, in soul, in song. Even after Ozzy's passing, Tony continues to play, not in mourning, but in communion. Each riff is a whisper across time, each note a message to his friend. Because music, their music, never dies. In the twilight of his remarkable life, Ozzy Osbourne's presence grew quieter, but never less powerful. The man who once commanded arenas with a scream could now bring tears with a simple glance, a soft chuckle, or a silent nod. His body may have been weakened by time and illness, but his spirit remained fierce, tethered to the music and friendships that had defined his journey. Among them, none stood stronger than his bond with Tony Iommi, his brother-in-arms, his creative soulmate, and the only person who truly understood the weight of a legacy born from both darkness and brilliance. In their final meetings, Ozzy didn't need to say much. The room would fill with shared memories. The grimy rehearsal rooms in Birmingham, the chaotic tours, the laughter backstage, the long nights in the studio where songs like Paranoid and War Pigs were born from both rage and poetry. Tony often recalled how Ozzy's eyes would light up when they spoke of the early days, not because he longed to go back, but because he was at peace with where they had gone. Ozzy's unspoken farewell came through gestures. Clutching Tony's hand a little longer than usual, sharing a knowing smile when a Black Sabbath riff played on a nearby radio, or simply sitting in comfortable silence, surrounded by the ghosts of music that would never die. There were no grand declarations, no orchestrated goodbyes. There didn't need to be. Their friendship had always transcended the superficial. They were two men who had weathered the storm together, who had lost and regained each other over decades, and who had proven that even the heaviest of music could hold the gentlest truths. In those quiet moments, Ozzy gave Tony and the world his final gift, a farewell made not of words, but of presence, a farewell forged from decades of harmony and dissonance, of wild rebellion and quiet reflection. It was the kind of goodbye that only lifelong friends could give, an understanding that the music, the memories, and the love would carry on long after the final note had faded. And when Tony Iommi finally stood alone, with only the hum of an amplifier and the echo of a distant riff, he didn't hear silence. He heard Ozzy, forever in the music, forever in the bond, forever in the space where no words are needed. As the news of Ozzy Osbourne's passing echoed across the world, Tony Iommi found himself confronted with a silence louder than any guitar riff. For over 5 decades, Ozzy had been more than just a bandmate, more than a voice. He was Tony's mirror, his shadow, his brother in the chaos of stardom and the calm of reflection. Theirs was a connection forged in the gritty streets of Birmingham, tempered through battles with fame, addiction, and redemption, and sealed through every note played on stage. The pain of losing Ozzy wasn't just the grief of a friend, it was the shattering of a living legacy. Black Sabbath was never just a band, it was a revolution, and at the core of it stood Tony and Ozzy, inseparable pillars of a movement that redefined music. Now, with one of those pillars gone, Tony stood before a void that words struggled to describe. In interviews following Ozzy's death, Tony's voice often trembled, not out of weakness, but the weight of remembrance. "There's a silence now," he said once, "and it's not just in the room, it's in my soul." He spoke not just of the concerts or the recordings, but of late-night phone calls, inside jokes no one else would understand, and that unspoken bond between two men who had walked through fire together and come out, burned perhaps, but still standing. Tony took comfort in the music. Playing their old tracks felt like opening a time capsule. Sometimes it hurt, too many memories, but other times it brought peace. When I play Paranoid or Iron Man, I can hear him. It's like he's still here, yelling into the void, giving it all he had. Music had always been their language when words failed. And now, it was how Tony mourned, through the strings of his guitar, the echo of chords that once made stadiums tremble. He didn't shy away from calling Ozzy a legend. But beyond the fame and the theatrics, Tony remembered the Ozzy few knew. The kind-hearted, loyal friend who never forgot his roots. In private letters and tributes, Tony spoke of the strength Ozzy showed, even in his final days, fighting pain with a smile, confronting mortality with courage. "He left like he lived," Tony once said, "on his own terms, with heart, humor, and hell-raising spirit." The end of Ozzy's life wasn't just a goodbye. It was the closing of a chapter that defined rock music, friendship, and resilience. For Tony Iommi, it wasn't just mourning a bandmate, it was losing a part of himself. But even in that sorrow, he knew that legends never truly die. They live in the melodies, the memories, and in the hearts of those they've touched. Tony's grief became a tribute. He promised to keep Ozzy's legacy alive, not through grand gestures, but through the music they created together. Because in every riff that echoes through the halls of heavy metal, Ozzy's spirit lingers. And in Tony's heart, the voice of his brother, his friend, his fellow madman, will never fade. In the annals of music history, few names echo as powerfully as Black Sabbath. Born from the industrial heart of Birmingham, England, the band didn't just play heavy metal, they defined it. And at the center of that seismic shift stood Ozzy Osbourne, the enigmatic voice that roared through the darkness and gave shape to an entire genre. Together with Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, Black Sabbath transformed noise into anthems, rebellion into poetry, and uncertainty into sound. Now, in the wake of Ozzy's passing, their legacy burns brighter than ever, an eternal flame that refuses to fade. The legacy of Black Sabbath isn't measured merely in album sales, though their records broke charts and rewrote rock history, nor is it confined to their awards and Hall of Fame enshrinements. The band's truest legacy lies in the culture they helped shape, the generations they inspired, and the souls they stirred. The misfits, the dreamers, the restless youth who found clarity in the chaos. At the heart of it all was Ozzy. His voice, raw, haunting, otherworldly, became the sound of alienation and awakening. He was both mirror and myth, reflecting the darkness within society and within ourselves, while standing as a larger-than-life symbol of defiant survival. Ozzy was not polished, he was real. And that reality, that human vulnerability wrapped in theatrical excess, became his enduring power. His solo career expanded that legacy. Songs like Crazy Train, Mr. Crowley, and No More Tears weren't just hits, they were lifelines carved from personal struggle and sung with the urgency of someone who had walked through fire. Ozzy didn't need reinvention, he was the reinvention, time and time again. Whether collaborating with Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde, or newer voices, Ozzy carried forward his unmatched energy, pushing the genre's boundaries even as his body aged. Yet it's Black Sabbath, the band that started it all, that remains the unshakable bedrock. The tremble of Black Sabbath, the fury of War Pigs, the raw drive of Paranoid. These weren't just tracks, they were cultural earthquakes, moments where the entire musical landscape shifted. They tapped into fears no one dared to sing about. War, addiction, madness, societal collapse, and did so with uncompromising force and clarity. Their influence is everywhere. It runs through the riffs of Metallica, the attitude of Slipknot, the atmosphere of Ghost, the soundscapes of doom, sludge, stoner, and goth metal. To play heavy music today is to play in Sabbath's shadow. Their DNA lives in every band that dares to be loud, honest, and unapologetically raw. Ozzy's death is not the end. It's a moment of reflection and reaffirmation. In passing, he joins the pantheon not because he sought to be worshipped, but because he gave everything of himself, his flaws, his failures, his fire, to a world that needed his music more than it knew. He was never a distant idol. He was always one of us, broken but brave, tired but unrelenting, defiant but deeply loving. As Tony Iommi continues to hold the flame, as new generations plug into those Sabbath riffs for the first time, and as longtime fans blast the classics louder than ever, the message is clear. Black Sabbath isn't history, it's heritage, and Ozzy, he isn't gone. His laugh, his voice, his shadow, they still live in the grooves of vinyl, the airwaves of rock stations, and the echoing halls of every metal concert around the world. Forever Sabbath, forever Ozzy, forever legends.